sexual harassment is a despicable misconduct that plagues many a workplace, and it also impairs human dignity and creates a hostile working environment. Now, South Africa is one of the countries that created extensive legislation concerning sexual harassment in the workplace. In March 2022, Minister of Employment and Labour, then Thulas Nxesi, published the Code of Good Practice on the prevention of or elimination of harassment in the workplace. So what do you do if an employee approaches you as a manager or it's just an employer with a complaint of sexual harassment? So to help us discuss this, we're joined now by a labour law expert, Natasha Moni. Natasha, good morning, and thanks so much for making the time to speak to us on this very important matter.
My pleasure.
Let's start with, just a simple definition of what constitutes sexual harassment in the workplace especially, and also is there a specific way of defining this?
Sexual harassment is unwanted and unwelcome and unwarranted conduct of sexual nature that causes harm or the reasonable belief that there will be harm. It is almost like in the bullying situation where you are the target, an example of the target. So that is really difficult to stand up and be counted for or to complain about from the very beginning. These sexual harassment manifests in physical, verbal, non-verbal conduct, such as unwanted touching, inappropriate comments, suggestive gestures, and sexually explicit messages. It is unwanted when the perpetrator's victim stands her ground.
How rife is sexual harassment in the South African workplace? Do we have any statistics to work off?
We've got a few statistics that I have for you today. The one is that 70% of all those who believe that they have been sexually harassed never complain to the company. And I'm talking workplace here, sexual harassment. They would prefer to go outside of the company and the workplace and seek assistance. That's how pervasive and ubiquitous it is, which is very unfortunate because those people who do stand up are taken and run through a mill of hardship when they do stand up and say, I have been sexually harassed. It's become very public. Everybody gets their opportunity to say what it is that they want to say. It is enormously emotional. And one has to think about both parties. This is a terrible risk that any victim takes when they complain on a formal manner about what they believe is a perpetrator.
Now, Natasha, do you believe that the legislation that has been adopted to deal with this plague has been effective to a large extent?
It's a beautiful piece of legislate. It's a beautiful piece, the Act. However, it's long, and I don't believe that a person who is in the trauma of what it believes is sexual harassment will go and read the Act, all right, and implement some of the remedies that is allowed from the Act. For instance, I don't see victims clamoring to the magistrate's court in order to get a protection order. That is one part and parcel of your remedies that you have in the Act. As you've seen from the news recently, is that as soon as you make the allegation, so the formal route to take is implemented, and then there's very little going to go back. And the experience of most victims is that this is your nail in the coffin, and very few people stand up for you. And getting a job, like any whistleblower, is very, very difficult afterwards. The victim does have another line, and that is Section 60 of the Employment Equity Act, where if the company has not handled the sexual harassment appropriately, then the company will be held vicariously liable for their inability to handle it effectively and within their policy at the workplace.
But as you say, it's quite an onerous process, and sometimes may even require a financial injection, which the victim may not be able to access. But then what sort of responsibility does the Act place on the employer to ensure that the workplace is actually safe?
Well, that's a great question. Firstly, you have to have a policy, and that policy must be able to protect both parties fairly. When you bring a complaint, the company must act quickly, decisively, and in terms of what the victim requires in order for the victim to have a sufficient support to continue after the sexual harassment. And if the company does not act within those bounds and within the policy, then they are held liable in terms of the Employment Equity Act. And that would be damages to the employee, to help the employee recover. Remember that this is a power differential act or misconduct on the part of the perpetrator. It is sexual harassment because the innuendos are sexual, or the language is sexual, or the deeds are sexual. But it is a power differential. So it is the manager and a subordinate most often.
So practically, if you are being harassed sexually in the workplace, how best can you go about making sure that you bring this to the attention of the employer? And because the reality is many employees choose, because of that power differential, not to bring such cases to their employers, as you pointed out through the stats that you mentioned. So they may be scared of not getting future employment, as you pointed out. That may be at stake. So if you are being harassed in the workplace, how do you best go about practically making sure that you are doing what you need to do in order to, at some point, bring this person to book?
Well, you need to decide whether you want to bring this person to book, because it is onerous. It's fantastic that you do that, and it's very courageous and brave, because you are then stopping the sexual harassment of other people. However, that doesn't assist you because it is a retrospective. Yes, you may suffer reprisals. That's par for the course, and that is why the company is held liable. I would, at first, before I complain, go to someone who can support me, but someone outside the company, and check in terms of your emotional state, psychological state, physical state, and mental state, and then discuss a strategic way forward. And please think of yourself. If you are capable of withstanding the barrage of trauma that comes at you, then I would suggest move forward with trepidation, and making sure that you do everything in your power to come to the forum with clean hands, and with a strategy that is a wholesome strategy. I do also think that employers are not being correct in their handling of sexual harassment, especially in this case. It does not seem as if they are holding both parties in their hands gently and appropriately in terms of their mental and psychological state. And that is enormously worrying and should be enormously worrying for the public, because this is a terrifying trauma, and it's one that will stay with you for the rest of your life.
Well, Natasha, thank you so much for engaging us this morning. Natasha Moni, labor law expert, speaking to us about sexual harassment in the workplace. And you have her contact details there. Reception@moni.co.za is how you can get in touch. But thanks so much for that.